Bonjour, and welcome to Lakehead University's Understanding the Role for Allies in Reconciliation with Nicole Richmond. We're happy you're able to join us today. Denise Baxter, Indigenous Makwadodum, Martin Falls, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, and I work as the Vice Provost of Indigenous Initiatives here at Lakehead University, and I will be your MC for the event today. In Lakehead's commitment to social justice and social responsibility, we advance the calls to truth and reconciliation and the University's Canada principles on Indigenous education. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendation to build capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect has become a guiding principle of the commitments Lakehead has made in both Northwestern Ontario and Simcoe County, and we will continue to guide our efforts in the future. Before I begin, I would like to share an important notice of video recording for this event. Participants are reminded that this online event is being recorded, and we are doing so to preserve a record of the event in the university's archives and to preserve and publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination in any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. If you have any questions for today, please put those in the Zoom chat, and we will address those towards the end of the presentation. So I'd like to thank you for joining us. It is now my very distinct pleasure and honor to introduce a very awesome person, Anishinaabe Nicole Richmond. Nicole is an Anishinaabe Ojibwe lawyer and wellness consultant that helps build capacity and supports Anishinaabe nation building in the areas of governance, education, employment, and child well-being. In her talk, Nicole will explore the role for allies in reconciliation. Using an Anishinaabe framework, Nicole will build understanding about some of the perspectives that Anishinaabe people and their organizations and governments work within, and will provide tips and tools to non-Indigenous allies to better support and understand their own perspectives, their roles, and their responsibilities. So welcome, Nicole.
I want to share a story real quick. I asked Denise for her permission. So Denise and I are friends, and for those of you that don't know, I spent a lot of time living in my traditional territory in Marathon. I'm come from Biktigong Anishinaabe, which is also known as Pick River. And for about 2 years, I spent just hanging out with nature. And you were most likely to find me hiking up a mountain in -30 or swimming in Lake Superior. I did this for 2 years. It was very therapeutic. And then I was called back to Thunder Bay because I was going to teach at the law school. So as I moved to Thunder Bay, the aunties, my aunties, so Denise is one of them, Patty Pella I saw is in the audience was another one. They really wanted to make sure I was moving in and safe and comfortable, so people would just show up with gifts at my house. So one of these days, Denise shows up at my house and she's, I don't know, bringing me flowers or who knows what she's bringing. And she's got this beautiful smile of braces. I was like, Denise, I love your braces. I've always wanted braces. And she's like, just go and get them. So Denise has braces and I have Invisalign. I couldn't get braces for certain reasons, but I just want to say aunties taking care of each other. So Denise is my friend. So many of you guys are my friends. Thank you for coming. Miigwech Bija Monday. Thank you for being here with me. So Gnu Quain Adishnakas, my spirit name is Golden Eagle Woman. Gnu Dodem, I'm from the Eagle Clan. I'm from Pick River First Nation, also known as Biktigong Anishinaabe. So Biktigong Anishinaabe Nadunjaba. I live here in Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is also known as Animki Thunder Weequaydong, which is the word for large bay. I'm really happy to be here. It's always wonderful to be with Lakehead University, and I really want to acknowledge the work that's being done. So before we as we get started, I have a very lengthy presentation for you, which I'm going to go through kind of quickly. This is going to be recorded, so this is a resource for you guys for who are teachers or whatever capacity you're here as a learner. The presentation, I think they post them on YouTube. So if this is going too quickly for you, you can watch it again and you can take notes there, or there are resources that will be embedded within the presentation for you. So I'm going to share my screen. The first thing I want to do is, sorry, of course, now that I want to share my screen, my PowerPoint is totally closed. You would think I present for a living. All right. here is the PowerPoint. The first thing I want to do is I want to share with you our One Anishinaabe family. Actually, I'll show you my title screen first. Understanding the role for allies. So many of you guys are here and you want to better understand what is my role in reconciliation. So I have lots of tips. I have lots of personal stories. I have lots of ideas to share with you. And there's going to be some opportunity for discussion at the end. There's a lot of material here, so I just want to go through this. But I want to show you our Noguade Wanzigit Anishinaabe, which is our One Anishinaabe family. And I'm going to just play this for you. And the importance of, you might not understand this. I have the transcription of the prayer in front of you. It's the preamble to our Anishinaabe Constitution. It's really important to hear language and to feel language. And even though you might not understand it, I really think that language encodes you or gives you the opportunity to learn in a different way. So I'm going to play this for you. This is from, this is a very beautiful prayer.
Is the preamble to Anishinaabe Chinakanagewan, the great law of the Anishinaabe Nation, which was proclaimed on June 6, 2012. The speaker is Anishinaabe Elder Gordon Wabasse.
Godwe onigisit Anishinaabe. Devenjigate Gistan Anishinaabe o King. Kivitagunaga dene Manido Wadziwin. Shkode Nebe Ke Nodin Kivitagusnon we nagade among Mompi Uskakamegan. Devenjigate Giminan which to end Daguk Anishinaaben Wanagadonjin Ninda Nijoswe Kinomaduinan. Zagedwin Deboewin Manaden de Moin Nevokawin the Baden Diswin Gwekodziwin Minwa Akadeowin. Debenjigate Himinogona Dedebinwe we Nagaden Duin. Kamanaden Dana Gabe Joebak Minwa Mewa Ejoebak Minwa Yabe Wabe Joebak.
So that's Gordon Wabasse. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a really important elder who passed into the spirit world last year, and he was very influential. He carried a lot of teachings that have influenced the work of many of the clients and nations that I work with. And every meeting that I go to that's with the Anishinaabe Nation or with one of the affiliates, we start with that prayer, and there's or the preamble to our constitution. And I just want to say a few things are really important. Creator placed Anishinaabe on the earth with the gift of spirituality. And I want to share a little bit of teaching today about spirituality and how that influences the work that we're doing as Anishinaabe people. And the other thing I want to share with you is this idea that you'll see that at the bottom. I'm trying to practice this to learn how to be a better speaker. But this idea that Creator gave us sovereignty to govern ourselves. These are the core precepts that really inform my work and the work that I do with my clients. And I'm very blessed and honored to do this work. So we're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to start with a big one. And you guys will know the work of Justice Murray Sinclair, who is the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And sometimes I get asked this in my work. Why can't you just get over it and move on? And I love this response by Murray, Justice Murray, and Senator Murray. So we'll start here.
If you just get over it and move on. And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this? Because this is about memorializing those people who have been victims of a great wrong. Why don't you tell the United States to get over 9/11? Why don't you tell this country to get over all of the veterans who died in the Second World War instead of honoring them once a year? Why don't you tell your families to stop thinking about all of your ancestors who died? Why don't you turn down and burn down all of those headstones that you put up for all of your friends and relatives over the years? It's because it's important for us to remember. We learn from it. And until people show that they have learned from this, we will never forget. And we should never forget, even once they have learned from it, because this is a part of who we are. It's not just a part of who we are as survivors and children of survivors and relatives of survivors, but as part of who we are as a nation. And this nation must never forget what it once did to its most vulnerable people. Many people.
And I want to say, this history of residential schools, I gave a presentation this morning on a similar topic, and I was talking with some students who are learners who are studying to become teachers. And one of the teachers, she asked this question in good faith. She said, look, how do I always teach my students about what happened 200, 300 years ago? How do I bring this into relevance? And I said, look, this is still very relevant. And so you will remember last year, there were the discovery of the unmarked graves. And that was extremely sad. And Indigenous people, Anishinaabe people, Cree people, Haudenosaunee people, they've been saying, you know I have family members that went to the schools and they never came back. Where are they, right? And when we discovered the unmarked graves, like that was extremely traumatic. And I think that sort of shook our nation, because it's one thing to hear about it, right? It's one thing to know, it's very sad. We hear the stories of survivors, but the graves are very tangible reminders. And I would suggest to colonialism is still really alive in and well in Thunder Bay in particular, the space that we're in. And I remember not really quite knowing what to do with myself, because it was that hearing about the unmarked graves brought up my own trauma, right? Like hearing about all these terrible things that had happened to these students and the ways that they had died. One grave out of school is too much, in my opinion, you know, and we're finding thousands of unmarked graves. And the fact that these students were taken to the students were taken to schools and they died is really sad. So we went into ceremony, and I just remember sitting, here's a picture of me and my mom and my cousin and my friend, my mom Diane, my cousin Vivian, and my friend Shannon. And we all just cried. We really didn't know what to do with ourselves. This is very real. And I'm going to talk a little bit about healing and what that means. And I want to just suggest to you, if this is emotional for you, it's emotional for all of us. And we are healing a collective wound in our nation's consciousness. And it is a big job. And just to say, I also remember during that time going out, I had a kayaking course and going out onto the big lake. So, you know, we're where we are in Thunder Bay is on the shore of Lake Superior. And I went out kayaking, and my kayak teacher said, you know, whatever you're feeling is going to be amplified by the big lake. And all I did that weekend, and I was with non-Indigenous people, and I couldn't say, I'm sad. I'm sad because these graves are found, and I'm sad because my people have been killed by the government and by assimilation processes. And all I did on this big lake was cry. And so this is real. Choking up about this. Sorry, I'm a crier. And, you know, in Thunder Bay, sorry for crying. Sorry, not sorry. This is real, right? We have what is known as the River of Tears, the McIntyre River. And we have students that come from remote First Nations that aren't properly serviced by their own education, secondary schools. And they come to Thunder Bay, and for whatever reason, they find themselves in rivers and they die and they drown and they don't get returned to school. They don't return to home. They don't make it. They don't finish their school. They fall into rivers and they drown, and their bodies are dragged out of rivers when things melt. This is sad. This is really real. And so Thunder Bay has been known as the river. We have the McIntyre River is the River of Tears. And I just want to say, as an Indigenous person, I've worked a lot of places, and now my practice is really about nation building and helping Anishinaabe people in ways that make sense to us. But I've tried to fit in, and I've tried to fit myself into places which were, non-Indigenous law firms. And I remember working for this firm, and it overlooked this beautiful river, picturesque, and there would be, swans or whatever would go by, and I would take my tea in the coffee room every morning, and I would look at the river, and I would only be able to think about the students that had died in there. And it's traumatic. This is really, really real stuff. And it's a lot. And I just want to speak briefly about Jordan Wabasse, who was a young man who came to Thunder Bay from Wabasse. He was only 15 when he went missing. He went missing on February 7th, 2011. And he was last seen getting off the bus only 100 meters from his house. His body was found May the 10th, 2011. And I remember during that period of time, I'm a powwow dancer. So every event that I was at, I was there dancing, and Jordan's family would be there with posters, and they would make a speech, and they love this boy, right? Like they never gave up on Jordan, and they really, love this young boy. This is someone's grandson. This is someone's son. This is an unnecessary death. And what was interesting, and I'm not going to go into the politics of this, but only, a few days after Jordan's body was found, the police said, well, there's no harm, there's no foul, there's no reason to investigate. And there was outrage from the Indigenous community who said, look, the last time he was seen, he was getting off the bus by his home. What happened in that intervening period? Why was he found 3 kilometers from his house in the river? And so there have been work by the Ontario Independent Police Review Director. There have been research reports that have actually examined what's going on in Thunder Bay and recommended that at least 3 of the 7 fallen feathers. So the youth that I talked about, that I cried about, that I cry still about, that their deaths be investigated. People don't just fall into rivers. Anishinaabe people, we grow up by rivers. We don't fall into rivers and die. That's not something that happens. And so I cry because I feel sad about the fact that this is the structural reality that has been created by policies and procedures and assimilation and colonialism and all of these things. And the fact that Anishinaabe people are still here is miraculous. It is not a sad story. It is a story of survivorship. The fact that we're still here is amazing, And it's a story of resiliency. And so Jordan's grandmother, she says, we don't give up on Jordan. We're not going to give up in our search for justice for Jordan Wabasse. The Jordan Wabasse family believes that there's enough evidence in the case to strongly suspect foul play despite negligent preliminary results indicating the cause of death as drowning, which were released prior to a proper death investigation. We hope the Thunder Bay Police Service reinvestigation will be transparent and not simply a cover-up. Our family will always carry grief in our hearts like other families involved, and we too also believe that justice has been served for our son, our grandson. Justice has to be served. Our grandson, brother, nephew, and cousin. So this is real, right? This is real. That statement was only made last June. And I just want to say, I just also want to preface before we get into the role for allies, I want to say I have spent a lot of time trying to fight the government for recognition of rights. I spent a lot of time doing Section 35 of the Constitution, which hereby recognizes and affirms existing Aboriginal and Treaty rights. That's in our Constitution. It's hard. It's hard to get the government to recognize, because once we start to shake up the status quo, things can fall apart. And maybe the equality or the rights or resources that have been achieved for one group of people becomes a little bit fragile when we start to examine the basis for having achieved this place that we're at in Canadian law. And I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit more in terms of privilege. Then I just decided, it's exhausting. Convincing the government all the time about what we're trying to do here is tiring. I'm just going to focus on becoming a good lawyer. And then when I decided to leave my law firm and start my own practice, I started labeling myself in a way that would make myself visible to the Anishinaabe community. And I stopped worrying about what the mainstream legal community was going to think about me. So I made this label up for myself. I called myself a wellness consultant, because I think so much of our work as Anishinaabe people is about building capacity for healing, building capacity for justice, building capacity for us to do things in the ways that make sense to us. And Anishinaabe people are given the gift, as I said, of spirituality. And so I speak pretty openly in pretty public places, including now I was so scared of what the Law Society was going to think of me. Now I'm a regular speaker for the Law Society because multiple perspectives are important. And I'm only saying this to say to those of you who might be scared about coming out into whatever truth you have to speak, just do it anyways. Just do it anyways and trust that it's going to be supported. It is very important. You are exactly who you are at the time that you're supposed to be here doing this. And I want to give you an example. My work is hard. My work is hard. The work of my clients is really hard. And the band representative program is something I've been supporting and working on with the Anishinaabe Nation. So that's my nation. So that's when I read you or when I shared the preamble. The Anishinaabe Nation represents 39 First Nations who are sort of from Thunder Bay down to Southern Ontario. We're Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. And according to the Child Welfare Acts in Ontario, so the current version is called the CYFSA, Children and Youth Family Services Act, a band representative is entitled to be notified, or the representative of the band is entitled to be notified once decisions are made impacting Indigenous youth who come into conflict or who, for whatever reason, have to be supervised, families have to be supervised for care. So the notice has to go to the band rep and the band rep has to be engaged. And this is where it's interesting because the band reps themselves have to know Ontario law. And on top of that, they have to know how to hold CAS workers accountable, not just for complying with Indigenous knowledge or cultural knowledge. That would be easy. That would be easy just to be teaching, to providing education and supports to workers. It's not only that, we have to make sure that the workers are actually doing their jobs right, because so many of these social workers have never worked with Indigenous communities. They really don't know the best practices for dealing with Anishinaabe people. And sometimes things really go sideways in child welfare. And that's a whole other conversation. So on top of that, our band reps are also simultaneously thinking about what do our own systems look like? What will it look like when we're sovereign? What will it look like? What supports will we have? What does a nation building exercise look like in child well-being? So I have conversations I work for my own First Nation in this area, and we're thinking structurally and we're thinking strategically, what does this look like? And, the director, she says, how do we create conditions for our youth to be loved? And that is, I don't know, maybe I'm being presumptuous. I don't think that we have that kind of conversation with Ontario legislators, but that's what my community is really concerned about. How do we show these students, these young people, the families, the children, that they're loved? How do we create conditions for love? And I just want to conclude on this point to say, this is the role of one person in the First Nation, the band rep. It's a lot of responsibility. And you can say this for anyone who's in education, who's in governance, in policing, right? We're simultaneously thinking in so many areas, and we're always thinking about moving our nation forward. It's tiring. My work is tiring. I have to switch hats a lot because it's always creative. It'd be fun to have a job where I was just applying the facts, the law to the facts and the facts to the law and advocating, but the law is something when we're working in this area, that's always, our conceptions are still growing and changing. And so we're just making that real. And the hard part about this work and about what we're doing is that there cannot be reconciliation without truth. And so when I sit in this conversation and I cry, it's because we're healing. We have to sit with our discomfort. And when we're healing, we have to feel the emotions. It's not just this intellectual exercise where we go, oh yeah, okay, kids were taken, terrible things happened. Oh yeah, at St. Anne's, they were using an electric chair. That's really sad. We have to actually, if we're going to integrate this into our consciousness, we have to feel it. We have to feel sorrow. We have to sit with this sadness. And sometimes that's really, really challenging. The trauma is not historic. And I just really want to bring this to your attention because there are power structures that have been grown and supported as a result of these processes by separating Anishinaabe children, Indigenous children from their families. This has supported the structures that we're living within. And there are lots of other legal things I could tell you about, like the doctrine of discovery and how now Indigenous people hold land and have land ownership and how that supports economic regimes that are foundational to the formation of this country that need to be reconciled. There are historic legal problems that need to be reconciled. It's not just today and what we're dealing with today. It is a long history. And we do need to think about who the winners are and who the losers are. And this is awkward, right? This is awkward. I'm only saying this because I want those of you who are starting to pay attention to this to know and understand privilege. People have privileged, benefited from these systems. All right, deep breath. Who's an ally? So you guys are here because I think you find this idea of what can I do very interesting, right? What difference do I make? How can I make a difference? What does this look like? What's my job? And so the idea of an ally is someone who has privilege. So the first step is to recognize that you're privileged. And the second step is you choose to stand for and with marginalized communities. And I want to give you some best practices and some maybe not so best practices that you can bring out of this talk. And the idea is that you take tangible, ongoing action to dismantle systems of oppression. And when I was giving my talk this morning with my friend, it was my yoga teacher, Latoya. I just love her so much. She's an ally, right? And in order for her to get to her position of allyship, she had to take a critical look at her own privilege and her own benefits and how she had the things that she grew up taking for granted and that were maybe easier for her because of her race or her socioeconomic status that non-Indigenous people benefit from, that Indigenous people might not have such an easy time with. So it's a disruption. We're disrupting oppressive spaces by educating others on the realities and histories of marginalized peoples. That language, I didn't cite it, but it comes from Queen's University. They actually have a really nice resource website that provides resources for allies. So if anyone's looking for additional places that they can provide, that they can find supports, Queen's University, if you just Google Queen's Allies Indigenous, you'll be able to find that site. We do need allies, right? Indigenous people are a population minority. We need allies because we need everyone to understand the history of the settlement of Canada and the way that the structures have been set up. We know that the colonial legacies impacts are ongoing. They're traumatic. They're with us today. And we're still trying to figure out how to deal with these legacies and to figure out what the impacts are. And I said this point already, but for those of you who know me well, I'm really, really concerned about healing and what does healing look like. And for those of you who have had to deal with major trauma in your own life, you had to learn that as much as you could understand or you could intellectualize what happened, you have to feel it. There has to be a convergence between what's in your heart and what's in your mind, right? And when that happens, that's where you can start to speak the truth. It is a multi sort of experiential. You feel healing in multiple parts of your body. And I also do a lot of, I do investigations about racism, and I help people, have supportive, if there are racial challenges. And one of the things I run into sometimes is non-Indigenous people, they say, well, or non-BIPOC people, they say, well, I don't see race. And I say, well, that must be really convenient because I see race everywhere I go. I look for Indigenous people everywhere I go because I want to make sure that they're safe, and two, I want to make sure that I have people around me that I know and that I can understand. And there is a subculture. There are things that are unspoken in Anishinaabe culture that that only, maybe not only, but someone who's grown up with that lived reality understands and takes for granted. So I'm always on the lookout for Anishinaabe people. I see race everywhere I go, especially in Thunder Bay. So sometimes people say being colorblind is an effort to show neutrality or equality, but this does deny the lived reality of BIPOC people. And I want to say to you, if the status quo is comfortable, maybe you've benefited from the power structures. And that is a really difficult thing, I think, for people to sort of integrate or to think about, or what does that mean? If you can go into, so for example, I'm a lawyer. If you can go into a room full of lawyers and you feel comfortable and you feel seen and you feel reflected, that's awesome. But I don't feel that, right? I don't feel that yet. When I go to the Indigenous Bar Association, or if I meet my friends in downtown Toronto, like the people I went to, my Indigenous friends from law school, I feel seen and I feel heard. And you guys are saying to me in your heads, you know, you're like, well, I don't feel comfortable there either for all of these different reasons. But I'm just suggesting that when you are dealing with the racial issue, it's pretty primary, right? Like it's really at the forefront. BIPOC people see race every single day. And I would also suggest that BIPOC people are really competent at just blending in, fading into the background, doing what you need to do to just fit in, right? And I would also say, and I know this is probably true for a lot of people that are listening, you can put on a different hat and you can just fit in wherever you go. So if you're living in this lived reality of being a person of color or coming from an ethnic minority, you just sort of fit in where you fit in, and you'll be like a salamander, right? Like that changes their color no matter where they go. It is most comfortable for Anishinaabe people to be with Anishinaabe people, if that's your primary identity. And not everyone will have a primary identity as being an Anishinaabe person. Maybe your primary identity is being a hockey player. Maybe your primary identity is being a woman, or maybe you're, you know, there are multiple sort of hats that you can wear. But I want to talk to you in terms of race and thinking about what that means. We're better because of our differences. So I am a jingle dress dancer, and my friend Cheryl, I love her. She works with the Indigenous women at DFC, Dennis Franklin Cromartie, which is the Indigenous school in Thunder Bay, where some of the students who come from the remote communities will study at, and it's a learning environment which is Indigenous friendly. She works with the young women to teach them how to make jingle dresses. And we did a couple of events with the young women where we welcomed them into the circle. And we said, we're not dealing with this river of tears anymore. We're going to rename this, because language is important and the way that you label things is important. We're calling this the river of hope. And we posted this on social media and it was shared like hundreds of times, because we need hope. We need to tell stories of resiliency. We need to tell stories of hope. It is not all sad. A lot of it is really, really beautiful. And just to conclude on this point, healing really takes time. And if you are saying to me, Nicole, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do. If you spent some time working on your own self, you worked on your healing, your emotional well-being, maybe your childhood trauma, maybe you did some meditation, maybe you started doing some emotional awareness or mindfulness work, that's a cool place to start. Because when you start to get more in touch with who you really are as a person, I think a lot of things around you will become more clear. So Brene, she's our friend. I would say she's a pretty good ally. The irony is that when we attempt to disown our difficult stories to appear more whole or more acceptable, is that we do attempt to disown our difficulty stories or appear more whole or more acceptable. But our own wholeness, even our own wholeheartedness, actually depends on the integration of all of our experiences, including the falls. And I would say that right now, Canada is in the process, you guys are in the process of understanding this difficult history and figuring out how you feel about it. Some of you might be angry, some of you might be sad, some of you might be indifferent, some of you might be curious, but the fact that you're here is awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Colonial guilt is powerful, and you need to really figure out how to deal with this and to heal it. And sometimes I have non-Indigenous people who come up to me and they apologize to me personally, and they say, I'm really sorry for what what white people did. And I don't really know how to respond to that. I don't know if the best idea for you as a non-Indigenous person or as a white person is to personalize what Canada has done. Was it you? Were you John A. Macdonald? Were you the policymaker? Were you that person that was a part of it? If yes, okay, that's one thing. But if no, you have to depersonalize. I remember I was in a relationship this is before I was married, and with a non-Indigenous person, and I share this story a lot because it's funny, and they were white, and it was probably the first time anyone had ever brought home a person of color, and I met his parents, and his dad said to me, well, we don't have any Indians that live where we are because we killed them all. It's like, well, you know, that's a weird thing to say. Did you personally kill them? But it's like this colonial guilt is very, very powerful. And maybe maybe non-Indigenous people need to have healing circles where they talk about this and they find processes to reconcile amongst themselves, because I know this is a really powerful thing. But it's not an Indigenous person's personal responsibility to forgive you. And I'm sorry for saying this, and I'm sorry if I'm hurting people's feelings, but Indigenous people are working on their own healing. And that is very, 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 very time consuming and difficult. And so maybe there needs to be a colonial support group or process for non-BIPOC people to think about these things and reflect on them. And I think that would be really powerful. I also think when you're learning, we have a lot of non-Indigenous people, for example, who come to the powwows and they want to know, what's this? What's this? What's this? How does this work? Why are you doing this? Why is this person over here? And I want to say that non-Indigenous people, if you're coming into an Indigenous environment, it's okay not to understand everything. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay not to totally understand what's happening. There are many cultural norms that you will learn over time. It takes a long, long time. So understanding your role. So if you're an educator, a helper, a friend, or a visitor, start to think about, what is the most important thing that I can do to support communities that are building themselves. Building relationships takes time. It's like learning a whole other language, like becoming friends with a person who's different than you. The subtleties will take time. Anishinaabe people don't always want to have to understand or explain what we're doing all the time. Sometimes I just want to go to the powwow and I just want to be with my friends, right? And although I welcome non-Indigenous people to be a part of that, I don't always want to have to be on a pedestal. I don't always want to have to be filmed. I don't always want to be the teacher. Sometimes I just want to hang out with my friends and do those fun things. So it's okay. It's okay not to understand. It's okay not to know the whole picture. The more time you spend, the more you will learn. At the powwow, visitors are definitely welcome. The MC will tell you what to do. Sometimes, and I'm just saying this as a dancer, I don't always want to have to, you know, pose for your photo, and I don't want to make eye contact with you and smile at you. And I know, you know, dancers look great, they feel great, but we're really there for ourselves and for our families and for our friends. And just to be respectful, right? Just to be respectful, to give people space to do their thing. Just understanding it's okay to stand on the outside and watch. Uh-oh, the mailman is coming. There may be barking. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Indigenous culture is also really compelling. It's beautiful, right? It's a whole person experience. Anishinaabe people are really spiritual, and a lot of times we're in relationships or we're in dynamics where we're maybe making offerings or communicating or understanding that there's more going on beyond the physical. But sometimes we're just hanging out, having a good chat with our friends. And so sometimes, like, I'll get asked, I'll be like, what does this mean? Or why did you choose that color? Or what's the spiritual significance of this? And I'll be like, well, I don't know. I just kind of just like the color, right? So being really gentle with your expectations about spirituality and about what that means. It's really hard to explain these concepts. It's hard to always have a reason or a framework, because also I would say that when we're taught in ceremony, we're not always taught the big picture. We're taught sideways, we're taught stories, we have to sit for a long time to learn. And we're not given the whole framework about this is the way cultural knowledge works and this is the way spiritual knowledge works. That's not the way that we're taught. Also, sometimes people come to the powwow and they're really feeling it, right? And I say, awesome, but maybe you don't need to express your full peak experience in our space. Maybe you can go and express your full peak experience in your own space. So you can be activated or ignited, but you can do that in a place. So this is a space that we've curated for ourselves. And I'm not saying this in a way that says we're not welcoming guests, but so for a long time, ceremonies were illegal. It was illegal to do many, many things as Indigenous people. And so just to be respectful of this is our place. And to ask open-ended questions to people. So without essentializing people all the time, without saying, you know, I think you're doing a really good job as a healer, Nicole. Like, I wouldn't know how to respond to that, right? But if someone said to me, I really like your dress, and just left it at that, that's an acknowledgement. I recognize you, you recognize me. I don't have to justify, I don't have to explain. When you're always asking why, it sort of creates a defense mechanism where people have to justify. Why invites a justification. And so just to ask open-ended, neutral questions is kind of a way to address this. Making space for people to do their thing. And I hear this all the time from my powwow friends. Sometimes we just want to go and be with our friends. We want to take the selfies. We want to dance, especially if, you know, we've been apart from one another for a long time. This was our first summer back on the powwow trail. It's fun. It's fun to be here. So just to be respectful of the space. The other thing that happens a lot, I think, for BIPOC people and for Indigenous people is I get asked so many times to help, to explain, to give presentations. Sometimes Indigenous people are tired and we just want to live our lives. I just want to go shopping. I just want to go to Safeway and buy my groceries, right? I don't always want to have to be explaining all the time. So really being sensitive to people that are tired. Maybe they don't always want to share. Do your work too. There are lots of good resources out there. Don't be scared to start going on a little investigation. Start to go down a path. Dr. Google or Dr. YouTube will help you along the way. It hasn't always been cool to be Indigenous. And I would say that only within the last 10 years has it suddenly been cool to be Indigenous. Ceremonies used to be illegal, and now girls are wearing headdresses at Coachella. Like, when did this all take place? I think there's a really big longing or need within contemporary culture for connection, for relationality, for connection to the earth, for spirituality, for things that are an essential part of Indigenous culture. And so there is a deep longing or hunger. What I would say is do your research, do your investigations. When you are maybe at a crossroads and you need a very specific answer, then put that to your friends, right? Put that to your friends or put it to someone in a really good way. But do the work in advance. Nothing stops you from going down your own, intellectual rabbit hole or exploratory rabbit hole. There's lots of resources out there. And I can't tell you what books you need to read. Sometimes it's okay just to be intuitive or to be sort of curious and to start to explore. Lots and lots of resources out there and lots of websites that offer lists of resources. Find what resonates with you. And Anishinaabe way of life is very beautiful and we welcome people, but you can come to the powwow and you can learn the values without necessarily having to adopt our practices. So some of our seven teachings, love, respect, humility, truth, bravery, wisdom, courage, those are essential values. What does love mean to you culturally? Or what does respect mean to you socially or in your own practice? There's nothing wrong with learning about the processes of belonging, the processes of relationality, and bringing those into your own practices without co-opting. So using our values to take a jump into your own learning. I just want to show you this quickly. Anishinaabe people, there's always someone that shows up at the powwow who is just having their peak experience. So this guy is at Gathering of Nations. He's feeling it, right? He's I don't know if he's Indigenous or not. This went around on YouTube, on Facebook. He registers. He doesn't exactly know what he's doing, right? He's feeling it, but he wants to be a part of it. And this happens all the time. The dances and the dance styles are very nuanced. Those dancers have been studying the practice for years. And so if you're feeling it, go and practice at home. And that's cool too. And we welcome that, but allow Indigenous people to have their own spaces. I want to continue with something that's very sensitive, and it's the pretendian problem, because in academics now we have lots of equity-based grants, and we have lots of research money that is designed to benefit Indigenous researchers, designed to benefit Indigenous communities. It's not just cool to be Indigenous, suddenly it's profitable to be Indigenous. And this is something that comes up. My sister is, she's a really well-known researcher. She's a Canada Research Chair. She sees this problem. There are major research funding grants that support Indigenous knowledge transmission or resolution or to support problems that Indigenous people face. There are investments that are based in equity to bring forth First Nations or Indigenous voice, and it's a competition for scarce resources. Sometimes people find themselves having benefited from pretending to be Indigenous for so long that maybe they forgot that they were maybe not Indigenous to begin with. Maybe they felt so comfortable that they thought no one is ever going to find out. Ethnic fraud is a really big problem that we have to be really, really careful about. And I think universities, sorry, the dogs, universities, colleges have to be really, really careful about and have to start debating and bringing in experts to think about what to do about this problem. A related issue is the self-identification process. So at the school board level, at the K-12 level, we do need data. We need to track how our Indigenous students, how Indigenous students are doing. We know that we have achievement gaps between Indigenous, non-Indigenous students, but there's still a problem with the narrative or with who controls who belongs, or with the systems that are set up to decide who is a member of the community or not. For example, at the First Nation level, the band membership list, so the complete list of members of my First Nation, is held by the Department of Indigenous Services. I can't access that list. The First Nation can't access that list unless we make a very specific request to have it. And that's something I'm working on with my First Nation right now. We don't even know who our members are. So if we have someone who hasn't been a member or who hasn't participated in a long time, or we don't know who their family are, we just sort of have to take their word for it. Membership and belonging are things that the community should be addressing and answering themselves. And we're still in sort of a gray area. And I just want to suggest to you, if you're not totally sure if you're an Indigenous person or not, that's a path you have to discover for yourself. But don't take up space unless you really, really are sure that you belong and that you want to belong. And I think belonging is it takes work, right? It's not just I belong, it's that I give to my community and my community receives what I give, and we're in a reciprocal relationship. A final point is getting to understand the local connection and who the local people are is really awesome, and really focusing on that. We do have this pan-Indigenous issue now. When I worked for Superior Greenstone's district school board, we had the school board map, which had only the non-Indigenous communities. And I looked at the map and I said, I don't see the First Nations communities reflected in this map. So we redid the map and we added the Indigenous communities. And so when students look at the map of Superior Greenstone, they see themselves reflected, right? This is one small thing that you can do. Get to know the local history, get to know Anishinaabeg people. If you're a teacher, try to really use resources about Anishinaabeg people rather than, for example, teaching about the Haida. Teaching about the Haida is cool and awesome, but if there's any way that you can incorporate local resources, really, really start to do that first. And I just want to show you, in terms of disruption, When I was in high school, I wore this t-shirt around. My oldest sister was already in Native Studies at Trent. And so she was teaching me a lot of things. And I wore this t-shirt around that said, God is an Ojibwe woman. And I think about the role of disruptors. If you have influence and if you have power, don't be afraid to use your influence. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. Go into places where your voice matters and tell the truth. Help people understand their privilege. Help people understand systems of oppression. And when you're working towards systematic change, know that you're playing a part in a really big system that has been rolling for many, many, many years. Don't take it personally, but keep going. That is the role for allies, is to understand your privilege, to go into spaces, to tell the truth, and to tell your friends who also have privilege what that privilege looks like, and to help people understand. And I think when we're sort of raising our collective consciousness or our awareness, that's how things really start to change. I want to show you this, but I don't have enough time. And I just want to say the final point is land is the real issue. In my submission to you, when we have equal resources, when we have access to our own traditional territories, when treaties are meaningfully implemented, when these historic land claims are actually resolved, when the underlying title to our homeland gives us a safe, protected place where we can exercise jurisdiction, where we can have economic sovereignty, where we can do our ceremonies, where we can raise our children in ways that are meaningful for us, and we have actual resources to do this without having to always, negotiate with the government or ask for resources. When we have enough to sustain ourselves, when we have our own land base, that's what I think the issue is. So understanding equality is something that we have to achieve. And this is my girlfriend, Deanne. She's so beautiful. She actually has beadwork, which you can't see in the picture, but she got it beaded into her beadwork, land back. So when you hear about land back, there's lots of resource material that you can Google. What does land back actually mean? Does it mean I have to give up my home? No, but there is still tons of crown land in Canada. There are national parks. There's lots of federally held land, which could be used to resolve outstanding land claims. There's lots of land. Let's figure this out. Finally, the community has the answer. It is not going to come from outside. It is going to come from within. So this is a beautiful gathering that I was at last year. These are the Ganugaming singers. They are so awesome. They are supported by a group of adults who bring them to powwows almost every weekend. If you're a powwow person, you've seen them. They're doing a really good job. The community has the answer, and we just need space. We need time. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to figure things out, but we are going to get there, and we are going to need to do this in a way that makes sense to us. So in conclusion, learn the facts. You're not responsible for the cultural stuff. Let us take care of that. But you can learn the history and you can teach the history. If you need resource material, anytime I see Murray Sinclair on YouTube, I learn so much. He's a great resource person. Don't be afraid to disrupt the status quo. Don't be afraid to say things that are true. You would be surprised with how many people are waiting to hear your valuable voice. Compensate Indigenous people for their knowledge. So one thing, I know I have some of my friends from law school on this call. Ursula asked me to speak to Bearskin and Parks, this like intellectual property national law firm. And she wanted me to teach about, some basic stuff about Indigenous knowledge. And I did. And what was really cool, she paid me. And she also made a donation. She said, where should I make the donation? The law firm made the donation. And I said, what about the DFC Jingle Dress group? So they sent a check for X amount of dollars. And that money was used to buy regalia. And that's cool. This Indigenous knowledge is really valuable. And this is emotional work, right? Like, I'm going to need to go and take a little rest after this, because this is not just intellectual, this is whole person learning. Do not be afraid to make mistakes. You will not learn this overnight. This takes time. It's okay. It's okay. Don't be afraid to say that you don't know. This was not taught in our curriculum. Don't be afraid to keep growing. we are constantly going to learn this together. This process is with us at least for, I don't know, at least several more generations, right? This is not an easy fix. And just to say, we're all in this together. So Miwei, I know I spoke a lot. It is 12:57. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I didn't leave time for questions. I'm going to stop my share. Sorry, guys, I talked a lot, but I think there's a lot of resource material there for you.
Excellent. Well, Nicole, as always, miigwech, it has been a tremendous pleasure to spend an hour with you and sit in this virtual space. And I see we have people from all over the place. We do have time for one question, so I'm just going to pose it from our guest, Dean. You used the term BIPOC during your presentation. Although the intention is to recognize the issues that people from those groups face, some are indicating that we should separate the categories because of the challenges that each group faces. What are your thoughts on this? Also, as someone who identifies as Black, is there anything I could do different to be an ally to Indigenous persons, understanding our own trauma we have faced?
I don't know, Denise, do you want to try and answer that? I'm sort of spent. I got no more. I got nothing. I often get asked to speak on these equity panels. So like Law Society has this requirement that we have to get certain amount of hours for equity stuff. And I always find myself in the room with like the Asian guy or the Black guy, and we all have the same perspective. And so I think if there's an openness and awareness that you already understand like that the power and privilege structures, I think that's a really cool place to start. And then learning, just going out, like I said, on the Google search, I think there's lots of information, and what speaks to you and what your truth is really going to resonate, and that's going to shift how you move yourself forward. I don't know if that's a complete answer, but that's the best I can do. I'm sorry, I've talked way too much.
Okay, I'll share the slide deck. We will, as Stacy had indicated, we'll edit the recording, and then we'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel at Lakehead University. Nicole, I will share with you the chat. Stacy will send it to you. Of course, lots of love coming from all of us. We appreciate everything that you give to us, everything that you share with us. And I know we get a chance to see you once, twice a year in this format. But it is always something that we truly value and appreciate that you give, and that you give to us so that we can continue the learning and the work together. So miigwech, and we'll see everybody soon. I think our time is up.